This feels kind of bittersweet, but behind me is a sweet lime tree. Let me move this out of the way, which is dead by now. I haven't been watering it for maybe 3-4 weeks or so. I just didn't have the heart to pull it out, so I just removed it from the watering and I've just let it decline slowly over time, which maybe is like a lot more heartless, but I just didn't have the heart to chop it down while it was so green. And the reason I did that is because we actually got an offer on our home when we accepted a contract, and tomorrow the inspection is happening. So I'm working on clearing it out just to make sure that the yard is ready to go, so that hopefully the inspection goes pretty good. But this is what it looks like. Honestly, it had so much fruit on it and it was thriving in terms of like most of the foliage, but those abnormal growth clusters kept popping up over and over again. And somebody on YouTube actually commented and let me know that I might want to look into witch's broom, which is a disease that some citrus can get. And I feel like that's what it had, because it had all these like weird clusters where leaves weren't coming out and fruit wasn't coming out either. And maybe it was due to like stress or the growing conditions that it was under for so many years. But I just couldn't risk it moving on to the rest of my tree, so I decided to go ahead and remove it from the garden, even though it did take me a really long time just because we've been really busy with the selling of the home. So this is what it looks like. I'm gonna give you a close-up before I start chopping it down and throwing it away, because I'm not gonna take it with me to the new property. We haven't even put an offer in another home yet. We don't know where exactly we're moving to. We're gonna be heading out this weekend to go look at homes and hopefully put an offer on one. And we have a couple that we really like, but we just need to see them in person. And we thankfully found a family who loved our home and loved the garden. And yeah, that makes me feel happy because I'm leaving the heart of Serendipity, but I am taking the majority of the trees. There might be some tropicals that I leave behind just because when we move it's going to be a lot colder and I don't want to risk losing all of them. But I am going to try and save as many as I can and leave a couple here for them so that the garden can take off for them too. So anyways, so let me show you what the sweet lime tree looks like close up. Here it is. Look at all that foliage. And you can see just how much fruit it had on it. And none of the fruit was ready or ripe enough to eat. It would have been ready probably at the beginning of next year. But because we're selling the home, I just couldn't leave it in the garden. And you can probably see some of those growth, like the witch's broom, if that's what it is, right there. It started popping up everywhere no matter how much I would prune it back. Some growth would come out a little bit more normal, but there was still a lot of new shoots that came out with that same type of growth, and I just couldn't risk it spreading to the rest of my fruit trees. So I had to go ahead and just take it off the water. And I did feel really sad because I worked so hard to keep this little tree alive, and it was very happy for a very long time. But especially since we're moving to a new property, I just couldn't risk bringing it and, you know, getting the rest of my trees sick, because at the end of the day I need to think about them too. So here are some close-ups that you can see there. Oh, it's so sad. Look, it had so much foliage and so much fruit. And this one was growing really fast. I remember having to cut it back so many times. And the whole plan for this tree was to graft onto it different varieties. But if it's diseased, there's no point in using it as a specimen to graft and then have those tools touching other things. And, you know, it's just going to be too much cross-contamination. And that's just... And in the end, I would have just wound up with a lot more diseased trees. So it had to go, unfortunately. And so right now what I'm going to do is use the loppers to chop it down. After I'm done chopping it down, I'm going to disinfect those loppers and clean them off. That way I don't transfer any of that disease to any other plants. And then everything that comes off this tree is not going to get added to any pots or anything. It's just going to get thrown away into the trash can. And because it hasn't been watered for so long, it's still pretty heavy. The soil in there is pretty dry though. And all of this I'm just going to toss out. I'm not going to keep any of it. You can see the tree itself, I mean, was in pretty gnarly shape no matter what. So it's a good thing that... It's a good thing. I'm going to keep telling myself that, even though it does so hurt to see it look like this. Okay. So let Let me move these out of the way. Maybe it would have been easier to chop it down when it was still green. Just in case you are not aware of the lore that comes with this sweet little lime tree and how it came to be in my possession, pretty much a couple of years ago, my mother-in-law was redoing her backyard, and this tree, along with several other fruit trees, had been in her yard for years and years and years. This one in particular, I think, was about 10 plus years old, and it was planted in the ground. So when she started redoing her backyard, she felt bad just chopping the tree down, but she needed the space for the project that was going to be happening. So before she started this project, she offered it to pretty much anyone in the family who would wanted to take the tree in and try and rescue it. But honestly, I wasn't very optimistic about it surviving because it was very old. I didn't know what variety it was, and on top of that, I was almost certain that it was mostly rootstock, because it was so old you couldn't really see where the graft was, and I didn't necessarily offer to take it in right from the start. What I had heard about it at the time was that it did produce a ton of sweet limes, but no one in the family was really a big fan of them. I think my mother-in-law really liked them, and other than her, nobody else was delighted by the flavor. So that alone didn't really intrigue me. Usually whenever I add fruit trees to Serendipity, I like to go for varieties that are a little bit more unusual. I don't know, they're just interesting to me. Maybe there's something cool about the flavor or the history. And because this tree had none of those things, I just felt like, do I really want to spend the time to try and save it when I feel like it's just not going to make it? But more time went on, and finally it started getting closer and closer to my mother-in-law's backyard project beginning to happen. So she reached out to me one more time and she was like, hey, do you want this sweet lime tree? Because otherwise I'm gonna have to just get rid of it. And the gardener in me could not just let this tree die. So against my better judgment at the time, I was like, okay, fine, I'll take it in. And in my head I thought, well, you know what, one thing that does pique my interest is trying to save this tree simply because it means a lot to her, and that alone is enough reason for me to try. So I did try, and it was not easy because the tree was very old, had a lot of thorns. When my husband brought it home, it had a bunch of ants all over it, and I could tell that the tree was not in the best of shape. But I still went through and started mixing up the soil for it. I did a lot of hard pruning to the roots and to the branches of the tree because it was so old and woody, but at the same time, it had such an established root system that it wouldn't fit in the pot. So there was definitely a lot of work that went into just planting it. And then I set it up on drip irrigation. I kept it protected for months. And then finally, once it started to recover a little bit and was past the point of being in shock, I moved it out into the little orchard that I had in Serendipity of Eternal Summer Street. And surprisingly, it thrived. It started growing super, super fast. But every single time that it put out new leaves, new shoots, I also noticed all of that weird growth also popping through, When I first planted it, I remember going through and chopping off as much of it as I could because I didn't really know what it was, but I knew that it just didn't look right. And afterwards I realized, like, man, that stuff just keeps coming back. No matter how much I prune it, it doesn't seem to go away. And then when someone finally commented and let me know to look into witch's broom, after looking into it, I was like, oh my gosh, what have I done? I've been pruning this tree. I've been pruning all my other citrus. It made me so paranoid because I've been looking after all the other trees in Serendipity since they were babies, and I didn't want to risk losing any of them due to this one tree that I honestly was not like the biggest fan of to begin with. And I just felt like it wasn't worth it for me to put all my other trees at risk for this one tree whose fruit I'm not even going to like, you know what I mean? So once I came to that conclusion, I stopped taking care of it. I couldn't just chop it down because honestly, it just looked so healthy and it was trying so hard. It had all the fruit that you see on here that's dried up. Just seeing it bloom, seeing it continue to try and grow, I did not have the heart to just go through and chop all of that off. I decided to just let it be, and it would just live for as long as it could without any sort of intervention for me. And then once it was finally done, then I would go in and remove it, because at that point I felt like that was the only point in which I felt strong enough to go in and take it out of the garden. And even though I knew that it was for the best that I had to get rid of this tree, it was diseased, it wasn't the healthiest, it still made me feel sad, simply because I know that it meant a lot to my mother-in-law. I love the idea of taking care of a tree and bringing it back to health, but the idea of removing it always really sucks. But it is a part of gardening, a part that I don't necessarily love, but a part that has to happen sometimes, whether you want it to or not. All right, this stump is all that we're really left with. I'm gonna have my husband toss out the whole container and everything, just because I still have to do a couple other things on my list. But the sweet lime tree is now officially not a part of Serendipity anymore.